Welcome to the Water People podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Hill, and my co-host is Dave Rastovich. This season is supported by Patagonia, whose purpose-driven mission is to use business to save our home planet. We acknowledge the Bundjalung Nation, the first and ongoing custodians of the land and waters where we work and play, who have lived, worked, and cared for this sea country for tens of thousands of years. Respect and gratitude to all First Nations people who continue to practice the cultural, spiritual, and educational customs of their ancestors. Today, we're in conversation with master surfboard shaper, author, and Noosa Shire councillor, Dr. Tom Wegener. Tom started shaping and glassing in 1978 in his parents' Californian garage. He's best known for helping to re-popularize old and ancient Hawaiian surfcraft, as celebrated in films like Thomas Campbell's The Present, Nathan Oldfield's Seaworthy, Jack McCoy's A Deeper Shade of Blue, and Cyrus Sutton's Tom's creation, Plantation. What sets Tom apart as a shaper, though, is his surfing prowess. Tom played an integral role in keeping the traditional logging approach alive when it fell out of fad, embarking in self-funded films like 10 Toes Over and Siestas and Olas, which Steve Pesman of the Surfer's Journal reviewed as, quote, the best surf travel movie since Endless Summer. In 2015, after witnessing the re-emergence of the local surfboard industry in Australia, Tom set out to earn a PhD on the topic. He published his thesis as the book Surfboard Artisans, For the Love. With such a breadth of wisdom and experience to share, our chat with Tom Wegener was necessarily long and meandering. We hope you enjoy it as much as we did.
Cool.
Thanks for being here, Tom. Thanks for driving down.
Oh,
it's a big effort.
It's a real pleasure. And by the way, just sitting here with you guys in this beautiful house and this beautiful property is that many people would love to be here. If you knew how good it was, you would really want to be here, I'll tell you.
That's kind.
Yeah.
So we begin these conversations in the same place each time, and that is by asking about a time or experience after which you were never the same. Do you have a story like that you'd be willing to share with us?
Well, I do have a story. It's very painful, to be honest. It wasn't a happy experience at the time, and it kind of scarred lots of people for a long time afterwards. Bill Burke and I and Dan Wozniak, we were kind of the three compadres through the late 1980s and early 1990s, and we had made a surf movie on Super 8 films. It was a proper film movie with magnetic strips. So one strip had the sound on it, one strip had the music on it, one strip had the voiceover. Put a lot of effort, years into shooting this movie. And we had played it in a couple of small clubs to get it right, played it in Morro Bay, played it in Torrance and so forth, small places. And finally was our big opening night at the La Paloma Theater in Encinitas. And that's a big old theater. And we had this premonition that something might go wrong. So we tried to get down there early, and things just kept going wrong. A Coca-Cola spilled over on the soundboard, and we get there, and the guy said, the screen is a certain type of screen, and it wasn't that type of screen. And we were trying to get it all set up when we were running late. And meanwhile, the crowd was around the block already pushing in to get in there. It was going to be a sellout show. And something was wrong. We couldn't get it to look right on the screen. And Dano said, oh, no, we can't show it. Stop selling the tickets. Stop it. And the doors pushed open at that point because there was such a big crowd and people pushed in. And I said, well, the show must go on. And so lo and behold, we get up and we have raffles where there's bouncy balls flying around, the big beach balls. Yeah. And it was just such this energy because there hadn't been a surf movie in that theater in years and years and years. Like literally, it was the late 70s when mid 80s when the last surf movie went through there. This was 1992, 93. So it had been at least 7 years since the last movie that came through and click through a projector. Mm-hmm. And the DVD projectors weren't there yet. So there weren't any surf movies playing in large auditoriums. So lo and behold, the place just fills in and we turn it on and it's blurry. And there's nothing we could do to fix the focus because what had happened was the screen that I would normally rent was an opaque screen, and we got down there and the screen was a mesh screen. So the film there wasn't through the Super 8 8mm by 8mm bridge there's only so much light that goes through, and a 35mm bridge is much bigger. It's many times bigger. And so you're supposed to have that much light for the screen to work. And it didn't work, and it was blurry. And so people were saying, focus, what's wrong here? And they were not happy. You couldn't actually really watch the movie. So a few minutes into it, I was just going, oh my God, this is bad. And this crowd was getting a bit hostile. So I said, turn the lights on. And I said, you guys, do some trivia. I'll be right back. So my dad and I took off, and we zipped out to the hotel down the road, and we got sheets, white sheets, hotel sheets. And the guy was nice enough. I said, yeah, just take them, because he had heard about the movie. He was a surfer. I knew I was well known in that area. We staple them to the floor, we staple them to the screen, and we pull the screen up, and we play the movie on a much smaller square on bed sheets. And it still was a pretty lousy display. The movie was a good movie. We knew it was a good movie, but it was 10 toes over. But it was blurry. The music is good. The music soundtrack by Bill Burke, is phenomenal. Dan Wozniak's editing and filming is fantastic. But it was blurry, and people started getting up and to leave, saying, I want out, man. This is terrible. This is a ripoff. You guys have blown it. Joel Tuda was in the back. He was 16 years old and just absolutely pissed off because he'd invited his friends and family. And so the crowd is leaving and demanding their money back. Well, the poor girls that sold the tickets just had a pile of 50s, and 20s and so forth. And it's really hard to give back $7. Meanwhile, the outside second show line had pushed in, and they'd pushed into the lobby, and the lobby was shoulder to shoulder, and half the people were trying to buy tickets, and half the people were trying to get their money back. And we just muscled through, and everybody walked out. And it was just known as the La Paloma disaster. It was so bad. It was. And so my poor mom and dad, went off to their hotel. They come down for those things. And Dano and Bill Burke and I went up to Chris Aaron's house, and we just put our heads down low and drank and just couldn't believe. And Dano, after that, said, I will never do that again. So the thing is, like, Dano's a great filmmaker and so forth, but he really didn't like the spontaneity and the things that can go wrong during a show. And so I was a lawyer at the time, and we shot that movie for the 3 years before then while I was a lawyer. Put all of my salary into making this movie, and Bill Burke did the sound, and he put all of his money in and everything into that. And so where this turned, why it was the thing that changed our life, was Dano said, I'm going to start working on the next movie. We'll sell it on videotape, because videos were just coming out then. And Bill Burke and I said, well, no, we've put this into, it's meant to be a live show. We put it on Super 8 film to be played live. So we brought it all the way around the United States. We took it to Florida. We took it to Fort Lauderdale. We took it to Cocoa Beach. We took it to Jacksonville. We took it all the way up to Maine. So we did a complete circle of the United States with it. But what that did is that changed my life, because I went from, I was going to be a lawyer. Yeah, this is my movie. This is my last hurrah. This is going to be it. Dano's going to show it. I'll go to a couple of shows. Then I'm going to go back and be a lawyer, to, well, no, I'm going to take this around the country. And in the process, in Jacksonville, Florida, we met the great Mitch Kaufman. And it just like a god, Mitch Kaufman. He had his TV show, The Radical Side. And we looked at that, and I said, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. A local, TV show, like, what did they call the local channels?
Yeah. I grew up on Radical.
Oh, yeah. It was so good. So anyways, we said, I'm going to go. We went back to California, and we pretended we were Mitch Kaufman and tried to be, and had our TV show, The Waterman. And it was an influential show. Chris Moro used to watch it. Cyrus Sutton. What's his Gate Horoi? Robbie Keegle. There's a lot of crew that watched it. Donald Takayama watched it. A lot of people watched it. And so and then from there, was just a burnout. And then that led to Siestas No Las. And then Siestas No Las, just by that time I was so entrenched in this gypsy lifestyle and just utterly addicted to it that law was just, I kept trying to run away from it as fast as far away as I could, and made it all the way down to Australia.
Wow. That's so classic.
Yeah.
That's such a different time. And I feel like I've had an insight into the dynamics of filmmaking when you're working with film. And Jack McCoy was always really clear and adamant about that. When he and I had spent time together, he'd be in his big booming voice, he'd say, "We're making a film. This is not a video. This is film." And he'd be shooting Super 16 and different stuff. And he would do poster runs around town the days before a show. And he'd do the surf car parks and be handing out flyers. And he's the dude who's shot and co-edited. And then basically from the root to the fruit, being in the driver's seat, all the way to those halls and auditoriums where you're putting bums in seats.
Yeah.
And, it's a very different world now for surf movie makers. But part of what I hear in your story there and what I've seen with someone like Jack is almost comfortable perseverance. You get a pear-shaped moment, and in no way at all do you think it's going to derail you and you just call it quits. Like, it seems like, what you just described and what I've seen Jack do too, in that whole experience, is just deal with the curveballs, deal with those spontaneous challenges that some people can cope and some can't cope with. And it feels to me like what you're describing in that experience could also be applied to many of your other endeavors and experiences, like surfing in your early days at a time where no one was surfing those boards in those ways. And I'm wondering, that kind of persevering spirit, did that come from your family? Do you feel like you were influenced in a way where your parents showed you the value of overcoming challenges as they came to you in life?
It's funny. For some reason, I believed in my head that we were wealthy. And I felt this sense of wealth. We grew up in a nice place, Palos Verdes, and my mom would say, "Tom, we're not rich. We're just in the slightly upper middle class. And we're doing well. We're comfortable. We live in a beautiful place." But I always felt that I'd been given so much as a child that I sort of had an obligation to do the best to work for society and to kind of use that slight privilege as I had as sort of a need or a responsibility to try to improve things and to try to learn things and pass stuff on and teach stuff and learn stuff and teach stuff. Yeah. Mm. And so that perseverance, it's just because you just got to keep going, Persistence is the greatest of all attributes a person can have.
What makes you say that?
It was on one of my friend's dad's refrigerators, and I read that.
So it must be
You had good food inside that refrigerator?
It was Bill Burke's dad, and I read that. I just thought, Bill, is this true? And we probably thought, yeah, that's probably true. Because with our surf movie experiences and so forth, people called Bill Burke and I the Grateful Dead of surf movies, because it's just that constant perseverance, putting out material, doing stuff, putting out, like Bill Burke and I wrote a book before then called Southern California's Best Surf. And it was a book on how to predict surf. And it's actually a good book. We published it in 1989, and it was about how to read the weather pages, how to read the isobars and the weather pages and the winds and the buoy readings to figure out where the surf is going to be in Southern California and all over the world. It's just the kind of that systematic approach. And we brought it to Surfer Magazine, and they said, well, we're not going to publish this or talk about this book because this is old-fashioned. Now you just call up. You just call up the phone line. You call up Surfline and to get the surf report. You don't need to know the stuff anymore. We thought that was so funny. But we sold out. It was a good little book. It was a fun little project. But we persevered and did it. We glued it up on the old-fashioned way,
Speaking of surf filmmaking, Tom, I've been hassling you over the last few months about a short film that I'm working on about the physics of nose riding. My friend Rhea Cortado in California came up with this idea to try to show the elements or the principles that are involved in staying on the nose. So I've been sending you these questions, right? Referring to this incredible paper that you wrote years ago. I think they ended up calling it One Man's Odyssey, right? But I always think of it as suction plus tension. Anyway, you break down the physics of being on the nose in such a clear but also humorous way. And I loved that. And I think everyone should read it. Maybe we'll post a link to that article in the show notes here. But I just wanted to acknowledge you as the icon of longboarding and nose riding in particular that you are, because you probably spent as much or more time on the nose than anyone on the planet, even though your surfing has taken a different trajectory over the years. I just wanted to take a moment to just acknowledge that, like what an icon you are. And a lot of people listening might not recognize that former iteration of your surfing life. You know, lots of us know you from Thomas's films with Alea's and reviving the old wood boards. But yeah, thank you for carrying on that lineage of longboarding. It's been massively influential in my life, at least, and I know a lot of others as well.
Oh my gosh! Well, thank you. I'm speechless here. So let's go to the next question.
It wasn't really a question yet. I was curious to know whether writing out the science, and maybe this applies more broadly to making surf films, but is there something about dissecting the experience that makes you a better surfer? Because I've found that it has been true for me that looking at the science of nose riding for this short film has given me a layer of awareness in my surfing experience that's been helpful. Not essential, but helpful.
I would say so. I mean, when I dream of surfing, I dream of that connection with the surfboard, and I believe I can feel the surfboard and the forces against it and how it's working, and the wave is pushing that piece of foam towards shore, and it would just go skipping straight to shore because you're on the nose, except there's that big fin there. And the fin holds the tail in the wave, so it squirts sideways, so it can't go to shore, so it squirts forward. But as with the nose riding tail and with the rounder rails in the tail and the thickness and the roll through the back third of the board, all of a sudden the nose will lift. And if you have the hips towards the tail and more of a pulled in nose, all of a sudden the nose can lift and get more parallel with the wave. And the more parallel with the wave, the faster that squirt happens. And so then you get the lift phenomena where you're standing, hanging 10, and there's three feet until the board hits the water. And that is when you're just levitating. And all those forces coming together are magical. It is. And the more you understand it, the better the material it is. And the more you want to experiment with it and just keep going down that track. Yeah. And the different boards for the different waves. And of course, living here, you have the past, and we've got Noosa up there. You sure have a lot of opportunities. But then again, Malibu is the same, like in Rincon. There's always waves, yeah.
Yeah.
And was it that feeling, Tommy, that sustained you, given that at the time where you were, a very young man in your teenage years and early 20s, riding these boards, having these experiences, looking around, and there weren't many other people doing that? How did you maintain your stoke in that niche, that little corner of the surfing universe that is Southern California?
That is a really good question, because where I grew up, Palos Verdes, there were there's my little crew. Our little crew would ride those heavy boards, but they were so cheap. Dewey Weber was the shop that had a whole bunch of these boards, and so they would sell them. Like I bought a balsa wood Greg Knoll for $21. Yeah, it's just phenomenal. They're just dirt cheap, but people would bring them in and sell them. And I brought a really nice YMA gun, 11-footer for $38, I think. Anyways, they were really cheap, and so we had this opportunity to ride these boards, and we actually got to feel them. And even it's going to sound weird. Okay, oh my gosh, 1976, nobody rode longboards except like one guy named Dick Fowle. Unfortunate name, but a nice guy, would rode these heavy boards, and we'd watch him surf, and he would just go faster than anybody else on little waves, unbelievable. And when he hung 10, he just would fly, and that was more of our inspiration than anything. Just one guy, and he was one guy that didn't go to shortboards from the 1960s. And we thought, in 1976, the 1960s felt like a million years ago. The 1960s actually feels closer now than it did in 1976.
Wow.
It's weird. So there were a very few influential people that you would see still riding the logs. And when you saw it, we just was pleasant to the eyes to see somebody hang 10 on a longboard at full trim. You're like, okay, so we went down that track. Yeah, it was a very small group of us, though.
And so, sorry, Lara, I know you've got lots in your mind,
okay.
but I'll stay here with the longboarding thing because there's so many interesting facets to it. And one of them is the names of many of the moves that you have mastered in longboarding that I'm pretty sure 99% of surfers that I know would have no idea about these names and moves. And Nath Oldfield and your son Finn. We've had a few back and forths about this and wanting to get some of these names out of you. And so far, the only ones I got were Scooter Boy, the Matador, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And the rope pull or something, the rope pull. So can you walk us through these moves that I'm like, because I've seen a few of them in real life and in Nathan's movies, but I don't think Lauren's really caught that many of them.
What is so significant to me about these moves is that it's indicative of an era in which play was at the forefront of longboarding instead of modeling aesthetics, instead of like trying to vogue a certain position and mimic someone else. You were actually innovating in a playful and joyous way that feels a little lost now sometimes.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, there's the spaceman where you put your hands up like this. I love this.
What is that about? Are you making a helmet when you do that with your hands? Because people can't see this. You just pretend you're... Are you on the nose?
Yeah, you're on the nose, in full trim of the spaceman. The man, the Quasimodo is beautiful. That was a Mickey Munoz.
Yep.
Yeah, bicycling in the whitewash that Mickey Dora would do. You just see him going from rail to rail to rail, bicycling, and he would be able to get his speed up. Doing that. Oh my goodness, there's so many. You're right.
What about the roses? Is there something about throwing something?
God, throwing the roses.
Catching them?
Okay, now that you brought this
doing?
up, this is serious.
Let's go there.
Okay, so Donald Takayama, he was in a contest one time and he got this great wave and he rode it towards shore and he reached down and he was throwing the water at everybody. He's throwing the roses. And I went, Donald, what was that? And he goes, oh, Tom, that was such a good wave. I had to throw the roses. Oh my God, that is so brilliant. And that's exactly what you're talking about. It's in a contest. He straightens up, he reaches down, and he pretends to throw the roses to his adoring fans out there. So I in my life, a couple of the movies, you'll see me throwing the roses, because if I get a great wave, and I know I'm on camera, man, the roses are going. So yeah, that's it. It's so far from a claim, It's the exact opposite. It's just an appreciation. And of course, I think Skip Fry talks about it the best when he says, he rides the wave all the way to shore because he wants to make sure that he appreciates that wave and gives thanks all the way. Mm-hmm. Watching Skip Fry surf there's differences in surfing that I'm hoping these movies can capture and so forth, because Skip Fry, I guess maybe it's hard to catch him on film and so forth, but the way he surfs is just mesmerizing. I mean, one time, Joel Tudor and a few of crew and my little team rider, we're surfing and we had the contest in front of us and Skip was up the point at PB Point. And there's a couple of waves here and Skip gets one wave and Joel just looks at me and goes, I guess I know who won that heat. Because, he just smoked everybody with absolutely minimalist.
Speaking of minimalists, surfing and surf films, I wanted to ask you, as someone who's made films in the arc of your surfing career, who do you feel like has been most successful at conveying the spirit and joy of surfing on film?
Oh, well, I mean, you might be able to know that I'm slightly biased in that answer. You have got the great Nathan Oldfield and you have Thomas Campbell. And both of them have portrayed surfing so well. That's the surfing I love to see. There's a little kid, I wish I had his name, who made this really fun movie that played, and I thought that was really good. It was all about the feeling of being a surfer, and no real talking. It was just these kids running out the jungle, finding these little waves and riding alayas in them.
Was it the Hawaiian kid, Chris Miyashiro?
Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, I knew you would be talking about him.
Me too. I had a feeling.
I'm glad. I had a
the
feeling.
best.
Yeah,
Right
the joy,
there with you.
the stoke.
joy is palpable.
Yeah,
so beautiful.
That's what I want to see when I go to a surf movie, actually. And of course, the adventure in Nathan Oldfield really captures in the heart in the sea. The India session where you guys were there, where you're body surfing, you smash it body surfing. And the voiceover is just the story that is told. I think is one of the greatest pieces. And of course, in that same movie, there's my spot in Papua New Guinea, which is the end. I just feel that's draw the curtains. The encore. That's it. That's the last I'll ever be. And I'm so proud of that segment. And Thomas Campbell just completely broke the mold back in the early 2000s. Just smashed it. And the amount of people that just caught on to that, just dove into that feeling was super exciting. Before that was Siestas Nolas, and that had a place, absolutely. But it kind of almost was like a surf movie before the Gidget age. It kind of got washed away with Thomas Campbell and with the other movie makers. But in its time, it had its definite place of really quality music, really good, 16 millimeter, good storyline, all that.
Do you think it's a hard thing to capture? You know how there's always the beef in the surfing world about when surfing's represented by non-surfers, how much it stinks. Hollywood always stuffs it up, and all this sort of defensiveness around how surfing is represented. Do you have any thoughts around that? Do you feel that way as well, or do you don't take it that seriously, or
I don't know. I think
how do you feel?
Gidget, the whole Gidget series was pretty spot on. Like, I love that. Turtle, in what movie was that? North Shore.
Big Wednesday, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I thought Big Wednesday was
Oh, yeah, North Shore.
North Shore.
Yeah, sorry.
Big Wednesday was a good movie. I think it still holds. It holds its own. Yeah, I don't really know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing worse than a pretentious surfer making a surf movie. That's pretty raw. It's pretty hard.
Tom, we've been speaking to some of the joys of your earlier surfing life in terms of longboarding. I'd love to get to some of the other stages soon, but we've been hoping to explore this theme this season on the podcast about surfing as a gift, and that our relationship to surfing implies responsibility. I was reading a beautiful book. Dave picked it up as well. Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants, where she reframes the idea of a gift for those of us entrenched in our economy of ownership, of private gain. And Dr. Kimmerer writes, quote, "From the viewpoint of private property economy, the, quote, gift is deemed to be, quote, free because we obtain it free of charge at no cost. But in the gift economy, gifts are not free. The essence of the gift is that it creates a set of relationships. The currency of a gift economy is, at its root, reciprocity. In Western thinking, private land is understood to be a bundle of rights, whereas in a gift economy, property has a bundle of responsibilities attached." And so one of the ideas we've been hoping to explore is how do we gratefully accept those responsibilities, both personally and culturally, moving forward, because as a culture, we've been great at extractive approaches to surfing, taking, mine. I was just wondering in what ways you've felt a responsibility to surfing, and how have you acted on those responsibilities?
Okay. There's three things. First, the ancient Hawaiians, the kahuna. The second is extractive versus regenerative thinking. And the third is going to my book, my PhD thesis, which is a book, Surfing Artisans. I write in the book that the surfboard shaper, as an artisan, has a place in society where they need to pass the culture on to the next generation. And if the culture is not passed on, then it's just lost. And I was concerned that the culture I got was phenomenal. And it really is, there's so much to it. And I got that from Donald Takayama and from the elders, and watching how Donald treated people. And so surfing, making surfboards and giving surfboards away was just a part of the worldview or modus operandi, or the way they operate in society, the way they deal with people. And I think that is a gift that he gives to us, and we do have to pass it on. Absolutely, this surf culture, and I can't really put it, I can't describe it, but it's something. It's absolutely there. I think that going back to the concept of the kahuna, I think in ancient Hawaii, if you were a kahuna, then that means you're a master artisan of a something or other. And you had kahuna spear makers, kahuna fishermen, you had the kahuna religious people, and I forget his name, but he wrote great books about trying to find kahuna in surfing. And sure enough, he finally found an article about where a surfboard Alaya shaper was called the kahuna from the ancient times. So surfboard shapers had a kahuna aspect as well. So that takes it beyond just making it as a knack or kind of a hobby into a much higher art form. And that means that you have got to pass it on. There's the tools involved. There's the culture. There's the culture would be in ancient Hawaiian times, and even now is planting the trees. And, you have to do it plant them at a certain spacing apart and water them and trim the lower branches so they grow straight. And I can tell you that that's what the ancient Hawaiians were doing. They had a complete forestry system. Of course, they had the fantastic, I forget that thing is Ahapua, where they start from the top of the mountain as a triangle coming down, and they would have had a place for the surfboard trees and the canoe trees and so forth. So I think you have to pass that knowledge on. And third is the concept of regenerative versus extractive. And we've seen how quickly extractive practices have failed us. And we need that regenerative practice. And I think just appreciate surfing, I think you need to be regenerative about the stories and the culture that makes surfing as great as it is. I fear, and I don't know this for sure because I've been removed quite a bit from the surfing circles and levels that I used to be involved in. But I think that the latest culture is a little bit devoid of that passing on of culture because you don't have the one magazine that everybody read that had the things in it, and you didn't have the one or two movies that would come out every year that everybody would read. So the words of the movies, the people in the movies, the actions, the philosophy, the culture of the movie would pass on to a great number of people. Instead, we're all in little tiny micro silos talking about stuff, and so I think that we just capture the culture in a little tiny bottle and not really get the overall culture. So I worry about that, but I think that hopefully with what you're doing, you'll get the critical mass again to come on and have the same idea.
Apologies for interrupting the conversation, but we'd like to take a moment to recognize the generous folks who help make this podcast possible. Sunbutter Skincare is committed to protecting people and the planet. They make vegan, reef-safe SPF 50 sunscreen packaged in reusable and recyclable tins. They're also the world's first certified palm oil-free sunscreen brand. Check out sunbutter.com.au to learn more about their skin and ocean-friendly lines of sunscreen, surf zinc, and skincare. Sanuk has been advocating for a more playful and inclusive surfing culture for more than 2 decades, while crafting some of the comfiest footwear around. Thanks, Sanuk, for your support and for encouraging water people around the globe to protect their happy places. Learn more about Sanuk's partnership with the Surfrider Foundation at sanuk.com. Thanks also to Gary McNeil Concepts, who make cosmic surfboards for cosmic people. Gaz's boards combine recycled and plant-based materials that are built to last without sacrificing performance. To learn more, head to GaryMcNeilConcepts.com.
You mentioned your book, Surfboard Artisans for the Love, which is based on your PhD thesis. I'm positive it hasn't gotten the level of appreciation that it deserves. It's such a fantastic and thorough exploration of the surfboard building industry, and everyone should check that out, whether you're a board nerd or not, or if you're just interested in the way the surf industry stands apart from other crafts. I think it's really illuminating. I'd love for you to speak to the ways that the surfboard building industry has been particularly resilient, especially when compared to the Australian automotive industry or golf club building industries. What led you to pen the book, and can you talk us through that element of resiliency in surfboard building?
With the book, I was looking at surfboards and wondering why they're still made here when cars, our cars aren't made in Australia anymore. Golf clubs were, Arnold Palmer used to get his golf clubs made in Brisbane for him. He was the greatest golfer at his time. And of course, Andrew Crockett wrote the book that brought that to our attention, the golf book. And so, I thought, what is it that's so magical about surfing? But at the same time, I was in my shed and I was making my hollow boards and so forth. And there was a lot of imports coming in. So I was wondering, is surfboard making gonna last, or gonna withstand the test of time with all the cheap imports coming in? Because cricket bats were made here; they're not made here. Right? Golf, and you would be thinking, if there's two things, a golf club and a cricket bat, those are two things you would think would be made for a high end, custom made for the user. Mm-hmm. And so when the global financial crisis hit, I thought, oh, this is over. But actually, more people came on board with the artisan stuff. Like it became all of a sudden even better. And with the hipsters had that sort of innate feeling that they want their own thing. They want to be different. They don't want what was in the past. And that was really exciting. So it was funny to me that the culture drove the desire to want a bespoke, unique product that was made just for you. And that's that surfing culture. So when I thought that surfing culture was waning, I was dead wrong. And it came back with a force. So 2014, we were at the Byron Bay Surf Festival, and there was so many custom surfboard makers there. It was great. And I thought, oh, hallelujah. So I went and I took a break from surfing, did the PhD, went back and was making surfboards again, and just loved it, and just felt really refreshed that it's really the culture, but it's the culture that drives that. When you get a custom surfboard, and David, hopefully you'll talk to this because you know a lot better, but you get a board that's made particularly for you by a master craftsman. It generally has a magic to it.
Oh, 100%. And given that whole experience, actually, its credit is really important, I feel, in that when you sit and you speak with an amazing craftsperson who is able to walk you through the finer details of their craft, and you realize, holy moly, that is some serious skill. Foam, timber, it's all very tricky stuff to work with, and it requires many sort of stages that you need to understand how to navigate. You don't just get in there with the planer and start hacking away if you have a very specific vision in mind. So I think the whole experience is really profound, and that's where the cultural value comes in. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the aspects of your book, which is so wonderful and so, as you would say, crucial for our culture to understand, is that experience, that, I guess, shared worldview and that shared valuing of experiences that aren't monetary, that shared valuing of where you are in the world. So you sit down and you start both pretty much speaking over each other enthusiastically about the waves in your area and how you got some the other day that were so amazing and beautiful, and the other person's like, yeah, well, I got some of this, and you're just sort of talking at each other. But that still is a really, really valuable experience because you're situating yourself in the world. You know where you are. You know how the water feels at this point, if it's healthy or not. You know how the sun feels, if it's here or not. And I think all of those subtle things are what you're talking about when you speak about culture, and that not only is it a great personal experience because you're speaking with other people that help you identify who you are and where you are in the world, but it also creates, and this is what I gained from your book, a resilience in that culture to persevere and to get through challenges, so upheavals. And they can be like the financial crisis, like you said, at a time where people were short for money, or look at COVID times. As soon as anybody got some money from the government, they went straight to their nearest shaper and bought a fucking surfboard. They were desperate for a new board. And that's the norm. That's not, and in your book you say that, like, this keeps happening. Yeah, this is one of our responses when these things happen. And so I feel like that aspect of your book is really important, because I don't think there's many of us in the surfing culture that have articulated that. We know that feeling. We know that, if you lose a local shaper in your area through an accident or something, or they move away, you feel there's a loss. Yeah. But you don't really know how to articulate the value of it until maybe it's gone. Yeah. So the neat thing I think about your book is that you're doing this preemptively. You do it before then, understand the value of these connections, these societal, cultural connections, in a way that is just really wonderful. And since I read your book, I've just been wanting anyone who shapes, any grommets around here who shape for themselves and their little group of friends to to read it and understand where they fit within that bigger picture.
Oh, that's so good to hear. Thank you, David. Yeah, there is a culture that's important, and the status, the cultural status of the artisan, of the kahuna is really, really important to have that social structure. And generally, they are leaders in a community, and they get treated well because they are respected, because they're surfboard makers. But there just seems to be a more to an artistic notion or humanity to making a surfboard, to be able to listen to somebody, to be able to bring them along on the journey with that surfboard shape, and help them enjoy their own surfing even more, which is, amazing, because surfing is so enjoyable. I was with my young apprentice, Matt Williams, when he had just turned 16, and I was so thankful because he was my apprentice for a while before then, but he couldn't drive. But finally, when he got his P's, he could drive me, and we went to this session where I was with John Brazen and Phil Jarrett and a few other people, and we're having a nice drink up at the surf club overlooking the Noosa Festival of Surfing. And when I was driving back, I was telling him, learn to be a shaper, because it's a great life. You're probably not going to make a lot of money at it, but my gosh, is it a great life? If you become one of those in that level, in that culture, you travel the world. And actually, since then, it's actually happened where shapers are traveling. Although actually my apprentice, Joe Harding, is over in the UWL factory right now making corkies, my corky surfboards right now. You can travel the world and you're treated well, and you have a place of importance, and a place of esteem, and a place you want to be, and a position, and all that. This surfing culture, the surfing community is real. And they, sometimes you don't see it until it's gone, like you say. But it is very, very important, and we're so lucky to have it, because I don't think that other things have the culture and the longevity of surfing. And I think that's one reason that you and I we're so enthusiastic about the Alea, because it took that culture and it found its roots, and it found that the roots went super deep.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know if, Lauren, you wanted to go to the Bishop Museum moment from there, or you want to go somewhere else?
Tom, there are a lot of places I want to go. I actually, first, before we go to Hawaii, let's talk about the central tension or the thesis of your book. How do you reconcile making art with a global capitalist system? I mean, you're starting to speak to it then, that you reconfigure your values, right?
Yeah. It's funny. I think that it was selling out. People always say, "I'm never going to sell out." And I say, "Well, you're right. You're never going to sell out, because you got nothing to sell." So it's a tough claim. It's an easy claim to make that you're not going to sell out, because you go, "Yeah, you're right. You're not going to sell out." When you do, as a surfboard shaper, they actually can make a product, or not even a product, shouldn't call it a product, a godly, being sort of thing called the surfboard, that has a certain template, a certain vibe to it, the way it rides, and you immediately notice that shape when you're on it, and there's been infinite examples of this. Then you get into that level where you actually can license this idea out because enough people want it. And that was my whole thing with going to Global Surf Industries with the finless surfboards, was you're never going to get one of my surfboards in Europe, in South Africa, in Japan. You're just never going to get one. This is your opportunity to touch that, to get as close as you can to the source. And I know it's a good board. And so that's what I mean by you're still in the board in some way. And so I don't really think it's selling out as much as we talked about that endlessly in the book.
Even that idea, the sellout idea, to me has always been a strange one in the surfing world, because if you look at some of the most iconic characters in surfing, the Wayne Lynch's, the Jerry Lopez's, Takeyamas, like so many. George. There is a corporate involvement. There is a selling of those templates, basically those boards that they've crafted that have become associated with their iconic status. They've all gone there and done that.
Yeah.
They've all gone there and done that, and most likely because they had little mouths to feed and a roof to put over those kids' head, and they felt okay with doing that, and they felt like, oh yeah, in the end, that shape that has my templates and my concept within it, they feel confident enough to let that out into the world. And so Yeah, for me, I put no weight in that term, the selling out term, because it's just like, no, actually, I don't think, have you actually conversed, the people who say that, have you conversed with that person and with all the other people in our culture through the timeline who have participated in those ways? And 90% of the time, those people haven't spoken to them and really picked it apart. So anyway, I know that was one of the parts of your book that was a motivator, and it was in there through the whole thread of the book. But to me, the overriding message I was getting from your book was the social currency, the relational value to things. And when we speak with First Nations people all over the world who speak of how young Western culture is so lopsided and I guess negligent when it comes to relational experiences, we're more obsessed with the objects than we are the relationship between the objects. And I just can't help but hearing that echoing through your words, and that, the relationship between each other,
with your surfboard, where it's coming from, when you're supporting an artisan, when you have a relationship with the person who is building the thing that brings you joy, you build this respect and relationship and responsibility to care for that thing, to care for the anchoring to the culture. Go ahead.
Exactly. No, you're right. The responsibility is there to carry it. The final of the book is, Horatio Greenough saying that, making money from your art is far be it. You will never make great money from your art. Your value that you get is the community that you're with. Because as an artisan doing amazing things, it's the people you're with that create the value and not the art itself. Isn't that interesting? I love that. And I love that, you and I are good friends with George Greenough, and we all hang out with him and we see them, and it's a great grandfather who wrote that and pretty much just summed up, surfing.
Yeah. And I feel like George is such a master at owning his own time. My measure of wealth at this point in my life very much has to do with, do I have control over how I'm spending my days, with who I'm spending my days with? That feels like wealth to me at this point in time. And George is such a master at that. He really owns his own time and sets his own schedule without compromise. And I think that's why he's been a bit of a mentor for shaping life in that way.
So no, I'm really glad that you brought that up, that it is a responsibility to pass it on, to become, in order to become a great surfboard artisan or any artisan, it takes that, it doesn't come overnight. It takes a while, and you'd have to master it. And there's so many different aspects to it. And it's a community aspect. It's a communication aspect to get to that level of a Takayama or a Fry or a Bob McTavish or so forth, really is a lifelong journey, and it's a fantastic journey. It's a fantastic life.
And just because, and we've spoken about this in the past, just because you get cultural recognition or notoriety in no way guarantees financial gain or security. Has that been true for you, Tom?
Absolutely. I've made it up the hill backwards, man.
I'd love for you to take us to Hawaii. And what was it that sparked your curiosity for old wooden boards? And why did you sneak into Hawaii's Bishop Museum?
Well, my curiosity began surfing the Palos Verdes Cove, probably 1976, when I was paddling out there. There's a little tiny grom, and one of the legends, or one of the older guys there, was Dave Constable, and he surfed with the Duke in Hawaii. So he, back in the day, in the 1920s, dropped everything, went to Hawaii, surfed his brains out for years, came back to Los Angeles and had a life and family. His kids grew up surfing. His kids were older at that point. They grabbed some of his wood boards, old Waikiki planks down, and surfed the cove on them. And I watched him take off on a wave on this plank and go so fast. Just caught the wave way further out than the rest of us. And he had to take off on the other side of the bay, because by the time he caught the wave and he was riding, well, he was backdooring the peak, and then he just flew past us at just in speeds that were just phenomenal. And that just stuck in my mind. and so after finding Polonia with Paul Josky and making the hollow wood surfboards, we were killing it at that point as far as the business goes, because we were making these hollow wood surfboards and selling them. And I put my ad in the magazine, and I said, look, sell them for $3,000 or no, $2,000. And both John Brazen and Phil Jarrett said, no, sell them for $3,000. And I said, oh, okay. So I put the price up $1,000. And at that time, you know, it was 2001, 2002, 2003. There was no surfboards for anywhere near $1,000. Anyway, didn't stop the sales. They were going out like crazy. The economy was hot back then. Both Margie and I read Tom Blake's book, The Uncommon Journey of a Waterman. And we said, let's go to Waikiki and look at the ancient boards and surf Waikiki and our hollow wooden boards. So we did it, and it was just this fantastic time. And we just happened to lucky. We were there with Donald Takayama, and the older guys came down to the beach. And there's one guy that was 94 years old and still surfing, and he told me all about, you know, the history of Waikiki and the wood boards and all that. So we went to the Bishop Museum, and I said, oh, I want to, you know, see the ancient boards. And they said, well, no, you can't see them. And I said, oh my gosh, my parents were there. And we had 4 more days, and it was Friday, and Monday was our last day. And so I said, well, you know, who's in charge? And a certain person was in charge. And so I went around again asking, you know, where is this person? I've got an appointment with him. And they said, oh, no, she's up in the cafeteria. And so, oh, where's the oh, it's over there. So we go into the building, and the cafeteria is on the 3rd floor. And I said, well, I have to speak with this lady. And it's Friday afternoon. And so my dad kind of pulled the security off, and I ran and jumped into the elevator, went up and asked where the cafeteria was. And I said, oh, you know, looking for so-and-so. It was really quite embarrassing as this groveling young man on his knees crawls up to this woman, tears in his eyes, saying, would you please let me see the wooden surfboards? I need to see the ancient surfboards. And she says, okay, well, I'll see what I can do. So Monday I call her at 9:00, and she says, yes, there's a student that'll show you the surfboards, but you can't touch them, and you have 15 minutes. And so,
Oh my gosh, that's pressure.
So we went in there, and that weekend I made calipers and, you know, made measuring all my tools. And then my goal was to measure the Olo, because that was it. You know, only Paul Josky had ever seen the Olo, and he did the same thing years and years ago. And walking into where the ancient surfboard was, again, you look at them, and as a surfboard shaper, the hair just goes up on the back of your neck, and you kind of freeze because they're so perfectly shaped. They're just these gorgeous boards on there, but you've no idea how they would surf. And especially at that time, had no concept of how a 16-foot surfboard that's 6.5 inches thick, 19 inches wide, and has a rolled deck and a rolled bottom with knifey rails, and weighs 160 pounds or some unbelievable amount, could surf without you just didn't get it. And then the alayas were just thin pieces of wood there. They're beautifully shaped. And you could see the artistry in them very quickly, but there's no understanding of how they would surf and so forth. So I templated the Olo and came back and made the Olo. But that was the moment, you know, to see those surfboards. And that was another moment that changed my life, because I thought I knew something about surfboard, but I knew nothing. It just completely cleaned the slate, because there's millennia of evolution in front of you. And we've been going hard at it since, you know, 1958, or, you know, just. So that was it. So I came back, and so started that journey of saying, look, what a fun adventure. Let's go on this adventure. Because you read the books by like Ben Finney, Hawaiian Surfing, and Ben Finney says this, you know, that we've never seen any of these boards. Somebody tried to make one. I forget his name, Quigg, I think, tried to make one. It didn't really work. You know, it's been. Nobody really knows anything about this, but here's the ancient stories. So I sent Ben Finney, who wrote the book, the videos, and he kind of goes, oh, well, you're right. You've proven that they did angle, the ancients were angling across waves and so forth. And that was the early days, you know, 2004, 2005 of that adventure. And it just was the greatest adventure.
And that really plays into so much of the hubris of our modern iteration of surf culture, of Western culture in general, that we assume that we would be more skilled than these ancient people who crafted their lives around riding waves, around being water people. And what I loved about that early conversation that you were having in making the wooden boards was acknowledging that there was no accident involved. These were skilled artisans. They were incredibly talented water people. And as soon as you touch one of these old boards, an alaya or an olo, and you are deeply humbled by your lack of skill on these crafts. You get it really quickly that the old and ancient Hawaiians and Polynesians had it dialed in a way that most of us have no idea about.
I think that's a great journey that surfers really need to go on. Maybe that would be, the next crusade is, seriously, you got to go to Hawaii and see the boards, paddle out the replicas out to a break, see the apu, system of how they grew things, how they grew the sweet potatoes, how they grew their fish farms, how they were enormously wealthy on their islands and they never depleted it.
And that's what made surfing possible, was that food abundance. Having known food abundance meant that you could make your art and you could make your surfboards and you could spend all day in the surf because you didn't have to work to grow your food so hard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a great society. Yeah.
And still is. I know we spoke with Cliff Capono, was it last year or the year before, I think?
The year before.
On this podcast. And I know speaking with him, it was really great to actually speak with him, because I know at that time for us, when we were exploring these finless wooden boards, these old ways of surfing that felt so new to us and was so exciting. I knew for me personally, the first thing I wanted to do was go to Hawaii and ride those boards, the Paumalu story of Sunset Beach specifically, and kind of know that actually the boards would tell you how people were surfing then. It's like they go a certain way. You can't go straight down the face on these things. You have to go across the wave. You go across the wave for long enough and you have so much speed, you have to cut back if you're going to ride the wave to shore. So I remember at that time going, the ancients were absolutely ripping. They were surfing so incredibly to be able to ride those boards in all of those different lineups over there and successfully ride them back to shore. It was just a no-brainer. But I do remember feeling at the time, I remember paddling out at sunset one day, and there were a couple local fellas that I knew there who were dealing with the pressures on the North Shore at the time, radical commercialization, lots of surf industry bullying its way onto the North Shore, buying up houses and real estate and forcing locals out. And there's a bit of animosity there, rightfully so, with that new form of colonialism, basically. And I remember paddling out feeling like, oh man, I wonder how this is going to go down. Like, is this cultural appropriation? Am I being am I disregarding or disrespecting these guys at all by riding this board? And I remember paddling up to one of them with all of this on my mind. I won't name him, but a very strong character on the North Shore. And I was, saying hello and telling him kind of how I felt. Like, these boards demand so much respect and skill, and the ancients were just mind-blowingly skilled. And he just smiled and gave me a big shaka and then big handshake and was just like, right on, man, that shit is so hard, and good on you. And it was really relieving. And then I felt the same with Cliff. I was like, really didn't want to be stepping on any toes with all of that experience and wanted to make sure it was all cool. And he felt the same. He said, no way, brother, it was all good. I felt like that whole thing that was happening with those Elias in that period was helping to shine a light of appreciation on the depth of that culture and the wisdom and the ocean knowledge and the skill that is still there and still strong and getting stronger now with the return of so much language and so many amazing things happening there because of people like Cliff and other Hawaiians who are feeling supported. So I wanted to just acknowledge that's a feeling among that experience, because like you, I remember that time so fondly, and it just felt like such an exciting time, so many new sensations and so many like epiphanies of the depth of the surfing experience were happening. And I really, just like Lauren said before with log riding and nose riding, I feel the same about that aspect of surfing, and grateful to you for your enthusiasm and your willingness to go that far with those boards and to acknowledge that depth of the surfing culture. It was really significant. I know at that time for me, I couldn't have been more of a corpo surf kid than I was, sponsored by big gnarly surf companies and everything. And it really sustained me and stoked me out in a period of time that was, I'll always look back really fondly. So thanks for that.
Oh, thank you, David. Well, it was a fantastic time, wasn't it? And I think it still has it's still rippling away. Like that rock hit the pond, the ripples are bouncing around. But Chris, who makes the surf movies, and it's still there. And the roof. I think that was just a piece. It's just another piece of the puzzle to help them and I just rebuild their culture and to look back and say, wait a minute, no, we were sold a lie. And to rebuild and to be a much better society now. Of course, the funniest story, I don't know if you've ever heard this story, Lauren, but when they went to Waimea Bay and they saw Waimea Bay was breaking and they saw David waxing up the LA and getting ready to paddle out, and Dan Malloy and Chris Demora were just in tears, just kind of going, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to paddle out. They wouldn't, David just runs to the water and they just looked at each other, just kind of slumped along, just kind of, oh, this isn't going to end well.
I know that feeling, Dave. I've been that person.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about.
He is notorious for it.
Oh, gosh. Well, you got the first win, Thomas. I just remember Thomas telling me over the phone, Dave got away from Waimea Bay. Anyways, it was such an experience.
Well, actually, and just to go into specifics, because we love to do that with this podcast, is what the Paumalu story of Sunset Beach and, the ancient rider being incredibly skilled and making that deal to not fall for another woman. And
can you tell the story?
And well, it's not my story to tell so much, but people can look that up, and I'm sure if they find a Hawaiian person who's got it down, they can tell it. But it's an amazing story, and it was
to revisit those ancient stories and have a Hawaiian person recount them. For
it's incredible and great lessons in humility. And there's many layers to those stories, And this guy, anyway, so that whole story really motivated me, and that was why I was like, we've got to paddle out. And I remember paddling out and falling, of course, on my first few waves and having to swim all the way in. And the board sits so low in the water, you can't see a fin sticking up or anything. No light bounces off them, barely. So you don't see a reflection. You just searching, really scrambling, like where did my craft go? And you're looking around, then maybe you just see a little bit of flatness among all the chop of the rip at Sunset Beach. And it's like, oh, there's a bit of flatness. Yeah, and it's getting sucked out to sea. So then you swim to the channel, you swim way out to sea, past the West Peak, get the board, which barely paddles better than swimming, probably harder actually. Then you paddle back to the peak and try again. And that happened. And while that was happening, I was having these experiences where I was sitting shoulder to shoulder with people on massive foam tankers. Peter Cole was still surfing Sunset Beach at the time on his big yellow boards, white t-shirt, no leg rope, just an amazing, older statesman of surfing. And they're all out there, and a clean-up set would come and they'd all get rinsed. And I think Chris and Dan were out there too at that time. You just slip under the peak because you've got this tiny sliver of wood, and the wave would wash through the lineup, take the crowd out, and you would be sitting there at the West Peak with no one there for like this brief moment, maybe the last 2 or 3 waves of the set.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that you'd catch.
Yeah.
And so anyway, the day carries on, and eventually make 1 or 2 rides, and I limped back to shore, so humbled and so tired and so sore, had like a torn hamstring feeling in my leg. And at the same time, I was just so happy because I felt like I'd time traveled. Literally in my bones, I felt like I had an experience that was probably happening every winter there at that exact patch of water and reef for all the local people that were there before being so terribly displaced and treated by colonialism. And so it was a very deep and amazing experience. And I'd love to get back there one day and surf those waves with some local Hawaiian people and to share in that kind of experience, because how often can we do that as humans, have in this modern, highly technological time, can you feel like you're dipping back into a very ancient pursuit? Well, hey, maybe that's gardening, and maybe that's where we should go now. And that this is a new phase. And I know one of the first things you talked about when you walked into the house today was gardening and surfing. Can you go back to what you were saying there?
Well, as surfers, you end up getting an innate feel for the water and the weather, and you just know when it's good. Like Dave with the windows just a few minutes ago. Oh my gosh, the easterly breeze has kicked in. You know exactly what the ocean looks like at that time. You know the whole story. When you paddle out, you can feel the current. You just know things. A good surfer is always in the right spot because they can feel all that. As a surfer, that it's actually relatively easy to do that and to spend your life doing that. But then when you come to farming, you're in a whole nother level. You're up a whole nother game because you're looking at, so many different aspects of the soil quality and the growing this and the seasons and on and on and on. But I think that coming to farming and growing our own food and getting into that is actually an extension of surfing, to knowing that the water so well, and now moving into this area of growing things and growing your sustenance.
Yeah, and you were saying you can't help but feel like a kook in the garden, and I feel the same. But also, hey, we got food to eat. We're doing all right. But it makes me think back to the conversation with Jeff Lawton, master permaculturist, and also with Cyrus Sutton about pattern recognition. And Jeff has often said when we're in our big garden, surfers can make really great gardeners because of pattern recognition. We can look and see a rhythm set up in any system. And Cyrus was similar in that, and they'd spent time together, so maybe that's something they've previously spoken about. But can you relate to that?
Absolutely. Yeah, you want to find the system. Like I got this big permaculture group in Noosa Permaculture Noosa, and we've got the big community gardens, and you're looking at it. And I think what you want to do is you want to talk to it and just say, okay, tell me. And I think that's what I've been just spending some time with some indigenous Americans, Native Americans, and they say that, at the end of a long story, the theme is nature wants to tell you what to do, wants to answer your questions, and it actually has an affirmative duty to answer your questions. So when you're looking at nature or how to grow things and you want to feel it, it'll tell you. You just need to listen. And I think that maybe surfers are good at listening because we've already done that in the ocean anyway.
We sure hope so. Maybe it's something for us to aim for.
It's an opportunity to learn how to listen. Tom, on your surfing life trajectory, you have been prolific with your book, films, crafts, been so generous in the way that you've shared your understanding of the culture. You've moved into politics, and I was curious to know if surfing played a role in nudging you toward politics, and if there was that sense of responsibility for that surfing maybe grounds you in that led you into public service.
Well, absolutely. Looking at how systems have changed or how populations have changed the environment. I mean, from Southern California, Los Angeles was named the town of angels. It's the angels. It's the best place on earth. And you wouldn't recognize it as that now. Salmon used to spawn up the Los Angeles River. It's changed so much. And I think really from Santa Barbara down to the border, the Mexican border, there's very little, if anything, that resembles what was the natural systems at the time. And so when I came to Noosa, I just couldn't believe that there's the best surf next to a natural system. I just made one of my last projects was the Waterman TV show. And my last show was about what did Los Angeles look like and how was the surf 200 years before. And so you looked at where the Los Angeles harbor is now. Well, it's land now, but before then it was actually a headland, not dissimilar, much bigger than Noosa actually, much bigger than Lennox Head. It was a massive headland with a sandbar coming down it. And so there would have been surf there. But it's just, completely gone. It's a kilometer and a half.
What's responsible for that change?
The harbor. So they built breakwaters. They built the breakwaters further out. And then they kept filling in the land because the land is so valuable. So that where there were surf, it's just land. So going into politics, I looked at Noosa and I said, this place needs to be protected. And even though it is a biosphere and it has been protected, and the reason it still has its natural resources, the beautiful headland, it doesn't have a road around it, it's all national park. And that was a hard fight to stop that from becoming an urbanized point, the headland, to a national park where it's worth a lot. And then the main beach is beautiful. Most of the river is very beautiful. The whole North Shore, at night when you look to the north, there are no lights. It's an Everglades. One of the 2 Everglades in the world is in Noosa. Hasn't been mucked up. And that's not by luck. It's very, very strong planning from environmentalists through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I was watching the election coming, and I thought, oh my God, there's just this wave of neoconservatism coming through. We've got the Morrison government, and we just the value is changing back to an extreme extractive environment, and Noosa can be, a lot of money can be extracted out of Noosa very quickly. And so I ran for council, and council is what is the intermediary between keeping it the way it is, pristine, and development. And so it was a rotten contest to running for it. There's 18 people running for basically 3 spots, and lots of people had lots of money. But as having the social capital of a surfboard maker, as the artisan, as somebody people could trust, I managed to get in.
You had relationships.
I had that. I had the relationships. People knew me. And that's what got me over the line. So, there is so much to it. There is that responsibility to give back as a culture as you get older. And so I really feel honored and lucky to be there in that place where I can vote and say, no, you're not going to develop that. No, we're not going to do this. No, the town plan is going to maintain, no stopping lights, roundabouts, nothing over 3 stories. Nothing is taller than a tree. So however the tall the trees are, well, that's as tall as a building could be, because from out to sea or any place else, you don't want to see buildings. You just want to see that green canopy. There's large areas for the koalas, of corridors, really solid wildlife corridors going through. And the koala habitat is growing, and the amount of koalas in Noosa is actually growing. We finally confirmed that there's more koalas now than there were a few years ago. So we have this, and I think that is super important. As far as our economy goes, it's super important for basically our economy as well, because if you have that, you have a tourist economy, plus you love being there, and you have a higher standard of living. All these things just mix in.
As a surfboard shaper, you had to manage or reframe your idea of success away from the idea of monetary success. As a politician, how are you framing your idea of what successful means?
Oh, that's interesting. As a politician, I guess, sadly, you're if you get elected again, you're successful, and if you don't get elected, you're not. It's brutal. It's a mug's game. It's not a great place to be, politics. You're blamed for everything. But I think that my goal is to empower the people and make them feel that their voice has a matter, and that they can change things. And I'm working really strongly with the permaculturists and trying to get regenerate the land. There's a lot of farming land that has just a handful of cattle on it. Was productive years and years ago, but the dairies have all gone. The various industrial farming is all gone, and all that's left is these huge paddocks that are being basically land banked, hoping that someday a development will get in there and they'll just cash in. So there's a couple of cattle on it, just keeping the weeds down, but they're not being productive. But as a councillor, I can uphold the town plan and say, no, that's agricultural land. It's going to stay agricultural land. That's that. It's going to, you're not going to change it. The other side is saying, hey, if you get 4 councillors in there that vote to turn that into industrial land or, for housing, away you go. That's it. People are going to make so much money and everybody's going to boom. But that's my thing, is to say, well, no, it's more actually valuable to the residents, because that's who you represent, that land becomes utilized for farming or really proper regenerative agriculture. And regenerative agriculture means that you have less space, but you get more out of it. It's more intensive in smaller areas, not the monocropping that goes on forever, but stacking plants and so forth in the forest gardens. And also that keeps the silt from going into the rivers. And our biggest source of pollution is the silt from these properties that aren't being well used go just washing down, because the cattle walk down to the creeks, they get their drink and they walk back up, and that compacts the soil and it washes into the creeks. And that's our biggest problem now, is silt washing into the creeks. Whereas if we plant the top of the hills, as Jeff Lorton says, plant your trees up there, and as you come down, then you have your intensive agriculture area, but you're not silting it out. You have your swales, you'll fence off the creeks and so forth. It can work really, really well, and it's starting to work, and we all see it. And what I said at the symposium this weekend is that this is within our control. Climate change is not in our control. Well, we're screaming, why didn't somebody do something about this years ago? And why isn't somebody doing about it now? Well, we're in Noosa. This is in our control. And we know what's coming. We know that drought's going to come. We know that food shortages are going to come. We know that food is really, really cheap right now, but it's not always going to be. And it's in the best interest of together we regenerate this land and to begin to farm it so we can feed ourselves, because we know that's where the world is going. And so it's just a microcosm of climate change. You can't pass the buck here, buddy. Let's move.
Oh, it's so great, Tommy. And you can hear the enthusiasm and passion you have for it. And I remember when we went north up to Noosa a few weeks ago to join you all in sharing the AgriHub idea with your community up there. It was really motivating, actually. I got a lot out of that, just seeing that there's a group up that way that are working on their plots of land, but also aware that there's others in the surrounding area that are doing the same, and to be supported knowing that there is actually a big network of growers in Australia who are turning to regenerative practices. And I guess I wanted to ask you, what is the AgriHub idea? And is this something you feel that has happened in other places, is new for you, or other places can pick up and also emulate?
Well, it's kind of the government or the local government working down to try to enthuse the community groups to raise their games, I guess. In our case, we have, because we're a biosphere reserve, and I'm on the Noosa Biosphere Reserve Foundation, I can carry on a project. And so I said, well, my project is going to be regenerating this land that's degrading Noosa overall. And so I went to the various groups and I said, what do you need to do? And I went to the farmers and I said, what do you need to do? And they said, well, if I had a magic wand, this is what I would do. And I would say, okay, well, let's do that. And so I've been able to pull together all the different groups and the great speakers with the people with ideas. And not that they're in silos, but to definitely de-silo them, get them in the same room, mix up the pot, and say, well, this is a project that we want to do. One of the projects is where you've got a landowner who's older. A lot of them are very much old. Sometimes the farmer has died off. The kids own the property still. They're not doing a lot with it. It's not being very productive. We'll say, hey, your land is going down in value as it degrades, it's degenerating. You put a farmer on there, and they use regenerative practices, and this is what they do, A, B, C, and D. That land will go up in value. And so no matter what, as time goes on, the land gets better and better every year. And so you're actually making money, because when you sell that property, it's actually be worth a lot more than it is right now. So that levels the playing field between the farmer and the landowner. And then we're going to the farmer and saying, no, you're not going to monocrop and, get a quick yield out of this. What you're going to do is you're going to take and make swales, and you're going to take the green waste that goes into the green waste bins that's chopped up and turned into double grind. We're going to use that as a compost and make these swales that go along with contour along the land. And we're going to slow the water down so it doesn't go into the river and wash off, but rather, grows things and builds your really quality soil. That way you're making money, the landowner's making money, and we've got a real good balance. That's just one of the many, many projects of the Agriculture Hub. But you kind of need an organization that can't disappear. That, as some of the community groups and so forth, they get good leadership, and then it goes down and they change and so forth. Well, you have this basis of a semi-government body which can't disappear. It's part of the biosphere that says we are going to oversee this aspect of the project. You can always handle on us. We'll hold on to this knowledge. We'll support this. We'll get the funding, blah, 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 to make sure that this happens, this program happens. So we're going to get a person in that's going to be an expert in this field, for a half a year or so forth. pay them to help set up this. You're the farmer, you're the landowner, let's put you together. This is what you're going to do. Go to the next one and start that. Because with them in Southeast Queensland, the big picture is the Olympics are coming. And I've talked to people, in London and so forth with the Olympics, and they say, my God, you have no idea what's coming. It's going to be a tsunami that's never going to end with the people coming this way. The way to prepare for it is to, start your economies that you want to create what you want to be, because you're going to have a big wind right behind you forcing it. Whatever you want to be, you're going to get a big wind blowing that way. And of course, a lot of the developers are saying, yeah, there's a lot of people coming, let's develop this. Let's build the combinations. Let's build, communities here, there, and everywhere. And, of course, the council are saying, well, no, we're going to catch this wind and we're going to make it regenerative farming so that we can feed all the people and then feed ourselves into the distant future.
Tommy, I think there was an insight into your political work that you're doing now at the very beginning of this chat, where you mentioned your feeling wealthy as a kid in Southern California, feeling like it was your duty to, give back in some way. And then you see the work you're doing now. And to me, I see sort of two things there, where you have this long felt feeling of wanting to give back as much as you receive. And then you also have this deep love of your home, of where you live, where you've raised your beautiful family. And what is it cultivated that love there for you, that feeling that you want to look after that? And you touched on it a bit before, but I feel like that's an expression of the giving back, the surfing, the relationship there.
Well, Noosa is special. Phil Jarrett, started the National Surfing Reserve, the Surfing Reserve. It is a very special place. The water is very clean and all that. There's 5 right point breaks that are phenomenal for everybody out there. Wow. It's very good. So I think it's a part of the tribe thing. Look at Hawaii. Those guys how much do they want to maintain their culture there? The ancient Hawaiian culture, and how much has been lost around the world. How much surfing has been lost? I mean, in India, there's a great shot from the 1830s of a guy riding 3 logs lashed together in the curl in a shore break, just ripping along, clearly surfing. In Israel, in that area, they were surfing the Haifa boards, and when they just dug up that place, they found remains of people from 9,000 BC. And they had the surfer's ear. So the bones were growing in the inner ear. So they were surfing. They were clearly surfing back then. We've lost that culture. So that surfing has been around for so long. And I feel as though we have to protect certain places. If you can protect a certain place that's of unbelievable beauty, like Noosa, and here as well. I mean, my gosh, for here for sure. You kind of have to. You just need to do it. And that's giving back.
Thanks for listening with us today. If you have a spare moment, please leave us a review or consider sharing an episode with a friend. Both help us to find the very best stories from our global community of water people. This episode was edited by Ben Alexander. The podcast soundtrack was composed by Shannon Sol Carroll, with additional tunes improvised by Dave and goofy-footed legends Neil Purchase Jr. and Christian Barker. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcast.